The Radio Times has been a staple of British culture since 1923. As the name implies, it originally informed readers what would be broadcast on BBC radio stations. This naturally expanded to television, and in the days before the internet, the Radio Times was your only way of knowing what was going to be shown on the TV. The release of the annual Christmas issue became a much anticipated event over time, as the period of Christmas would become associated with good quality television. One example is of course Wallace Gromit, which has been played on and around Christmas almost every year since 1993. So with the duo's first Radio Times cover in well over a decade, which also happens to be the now legendary Christmas double issue, I thought I'd take a quick look at the history of Wallace and Gromit Radio Times covers over the years. The earliest Radio Times cover that I could find that featured Wallace and Gromit was strangely this one from 1998, with the headline Wallace and Gromit's Grand TV Guide. You may have noticed that this is an original photo shoot that we haven't seen anywhere else. But yeah, Wallace and Gromit are on a beach. Wallace wields a disgusting cheese ice lolly. It's strange because there wasn't a film to promote in 1998. In fact, this period of time was like the second longest hiatus that Wallace and Gromit have ever had, and the next film wouldn't come around until 7 years later. But yeah, a very vintage look to this one. You can tell it's from the earlier days of Wallace and Gromit, and yeah, it's, I think, a pretty obscure image that you might not have seen before. Also, take note of the price, which is 79p. Bearing in mind this one that I picked up recently was $5.95, so that's inflation for you. It took a decade until Wallace and Gromit would again feature on the Radio Times cover. This time in December of 2008, it was for the legendary Christmas issue, and coincided with the release of A Matter of Love and Death, the last Wallace and Gromit film up until now, and most watched Christmas programme that year. Though, as is now tradition for these Radio Times covers, an original festive scene was crafted, completely unrelated to the film. And the main text here reads Happy Christmas and a crackin' New Year. It features Wallace and Gromit watching some Christmas telly. They're wearing party hats and surrounded by lovely atmospheric Christmas lighting and decorations, one of which is Wendeline as an angel atop the tree, whilst Feathers McGraw lurks not so menacingly outside the window, also donning a party hat that you'd find in Christmas crackers. But yeah, no wonder people have been expecting them to return for so long. But aside from this lovely festive cover and Wallace's slightly too enthusiastic expression, the issue would feature an interview with Nick Park regarding the creation of both the new film and this specially shot cover. To coincide with the release of Wallace and Gromit's World of Invention, the duo would once again feature on the cover in October of 2010. This time it was still an originally shot cover but actually themed around the show. Wallace is reading the Radioactive Times, which itself features this promotional image of Paella from the last film, edited to have purple hair and a yellow umbrella. But aside from the original photoshoot, this one features their back plastered across the front, which is ironic considering they'd only been away for 2 years, but it felt like a long time at the time. It also says free inside, giant poster and wall chart, and that is of the magazine's cover, which you can flip over to see examples of inventions from the show. And we've also got a Nick Park exclusive in there. But I do want to mention how surprising it is that World of Invention got so much of a marketing push. I remember it being on the BBC, and it was in November, December time, around Christmas. And it was a decent series for what it was, but obviously the nature of it was very different to the main films. Nice to see it represented here, nonetheless. And if you're wondering why Were Rabbit was missed out, that's because it was a DreamWorks film and didn't premiere on TV. Due to the undeniable popularity of Wallace and Gromit and their increased association with Christmas, the Radio Times seemed to pick up on this. By the time of the latter half of December, World of Invention had already broadcast and there wasn't any Wallace and Gromit content for Christmas that year. But despite this, 2010's cracking Christmas issue would feature them in another original cover, in which Wallace and Gromit don Santa hats and carry mounds of presents against a lovely snowy backdrop. If anything, this just emphasises the celebrity status at this point, as they can literally just pose for a magazine photoshoot for no particular reason and people will still enjoy it. As we know, there hasn't been any more Wallace and Gromit films or series since 2010, but they did appear once more on Radio Times, fronting a standard issue in July of 2012. This was for Wallace and Gromit's musical marvels, the duo's first night at the proms, and once more features an interview with Nick Park regarding the performance as a whole and its original animated segments, with Ben Whitehead having already taken over as Wallace by this point. The image for this one is less complex, I think, and fairly straightforward. You've got Wallace and Gromit in their fancy bow ties, Gromit's carefully playing a violin, whilst Wallace clumsily has a massive pair of cymbals. And of course we have crackin' tuned Gromit written across the front. And that was the last time that Wallace and Gromit had featured on a Radio Times cover, 12 years ago, or 14 years since the last Christmas cover. And for all we knew, they might never have appeared on it again. But that all changed with the upcoming release of Vengeance Most Fowl this year, as although the Radio Times is like some historical artifact that serves little to no purpose to most people at this point, the Christmas issue remains an iconic tradition for some due to its lengthy history. And this cover that we have in 2024 is probably my favourite yet, as the whole thing is just really well put together. We even get an original animation from which the cover was derived. And altogether the whole thing took 3 months to create all the sets and models and animate it. But it features Wallace and Gromit in this beautifully crafted sleigh that you can see being put together in behind the scenes footage online and read about in the magazine itself. Parts of the sleigh are derived from Wallace and Gromit's van, which is really cool attention to detail, and then you've got some really nice outfits and use of practical effects, whilst you may have noticed that Feathers McGraw is now meaningfully lurking at the top of the cover with a Christmas pudding. It just feels right seeing this cover on the shelves and adds to the triumphant return of Wallace and Gromit. And yeah, since I have this one physically here, the content of it is interesting to say the least. Specifically, it takes one quote from Nick Park, which is, "I don't want people to imagine Wallace naked too much." I love the use of too much on the end as if to imply that it's alright in small doses. Anyway, the Radio Times expands upon this one line in an unfortunate way, with an article that reads, "Flippin' Nora, never mind the wrong trousers, Nick Park's creation is appearing without any this Christmas." Well then, I'll leave it at that. But if you want some context, this copy of the Radio Times is out now. I know some people have mentioned wanting it from overseas, and it seems that they pop up on eBay. But yeah, the Radio Times should be available in many stores across the UK in the lead up to Christmas, which is creeping closer and closer. So from the different covers that we've looked at, let us know your favourite in the comments down below. That's all from me, and I will see you all again very soon.